Why is it that the United States, despite being the largest oil producer in the world, cannot fully utilize its own oil? It's similar to someone growing wheat on their own land, but still needing to beg others to feed themselves. In the world we live in, things are rarely as they seem. For example, millions of shipping containers leave China for the United States every year, but why do so many of them end up discarded or unused? And amidst all this, how and why does Iran manage to smuggle Boeing 777 aircraft? Welcome back to Explore with Lar. Did you know that at any given moment, there are nearly 300,000 ships on the oceans? This includes oil tankers, LPG and LNG carriers, tugboats, passenger ships, and most importantly, container ships that keep the global economy moving. About 90% of global trade travels via sea routes. Estimates suggest that every minute, 6,000 to 8,000 container ships are navigating oceans worldwide. With the help of automatic identification systems, you can even track them in real time. Websites like Marine Traffic or Vessel Finder make the oceans look like a galaxy of tiny lights, each representing a ship carrying millions of dollars worth of goods. Most of these container ships originate from China and travel to Europe and the US. On average, a ship carries around 5,000 containers. That means about 40 million containers are moving across oceans at any given time. From the clothes we wear to our smartphones, much of what we use has traveled in these containers. Everything might seem orderly at first glance. Goods arrive, containers return empty. But in reality, the system is far more complicated and frustrating. Global trade balances are heavily skewed. China produces and exports far more than it imports, creating a massive surplus. In 2023 alone, China's trade surplus exceeded $823 billion, exporting $3,380 billion worth of goods, while importing only $2,557 billion. The problem arises when these containers reach the US or Europe. The US, being the world's largest consumer, imports far more than it exports. Only about 40% of containers leaving US ports return full. The remaining 60%? They sit idle in junkyards across America. Returning an empty container to China costs nearly $3,000, and it takes up space on ships that could otherwise carry goods worth millions. Moreover, it's cheaper for China to produce new containers than to pay for returning used ones. Many of these stranded containers are eventually sold for cheap storage, construction, or even converted into homes and offices. When nothing else can be done, they are melted down to recover steel, roughly 2 tons per container. So, next time you pass a port stacked with containers, remember, it's not just junk, it's a story of a deeply imbalanced global economy. Now let's return to the question that baffles many. Why does the US, the world's largest oil producer, still rely on imported oil? While America tops global oil production charts, surpassing Saudi Arabia and Russia, it is also the second largest oil importer. The reasons are threefold. First, the chemistry of the oil itself. U.S. oil is largely light crude, which is less viscous, but most U.S. refineries were designed decades ago to process heavy crude imported from Mexico and Venezuela. Retrofitting refineries to handle light crude would cost over $200 billion, so it's more economical to sell U.S. oil at high prices abroad and import cheaper heavy crude instead. Second, logistics. Oil production centers like Texas are far from major refinery hubs on the East Coast. California, for example, has effectively become an oil island because there aren't enough pipelines to transport crude efficiently. Importing oil from abroad ends up being cheaper than transporting domestic light crude internally. Finally, the Jones Act, a law dating back to World War I, complicates internal shipping. The law mandates that goods shipped between U.S. ports must use U.S.-built ships with American crews. This was meant to ensure a ready fleet for military emergencies. However, U.S. ships are far more expensive to operate than foreign vessels, making domestic transport costly. This forces refineries to continue importing oil rather than relying on domestic supply. Shifting to Iran, decades of U.S. sanctions have blocked Iran from buying or selling with America and its allies, yet Iran has managed to assemble a fleet of Boeing 777 aircraft. In 2024-25, 5 such aircraft appeared under Iran's Mahan Air, purchased through a complex network of shell companies and intermediaries spanning Australia, China, Madagascar, and Cambodia. These aircraft were registered under foreign flags, making them difficult for U.S. authorities to track or seize. By the time the planes landed in Iranian cities like Chabahar, Zahedan, and Mashhad, they were fully operational under Iranian control. Because civil aviation law prevents countries from blocking foreign civilian aircraft from using their airspace unless there's a declared war, Iran's fleet operates largely without interference, despite sanctions. However, refueling restrictions still pose logistical challenges, forcing careful planning for each international flight. This is the reality of our global economy and geopolitics. The U.S. produces vast quantities of oil, yet remains dependent on imports. Global trade is imbalanced, leaving containers stranded, and nations like Iran find ingenious ways to bypass restrictions. Thank you for watching Explore with Lar. Don't forget to like, share, and comment. See you in our next exciting episode.